Welcome to Jolene's Stories, where a woman who gave everything finally reclaims it.
My name is Lori Gray. I'm 54 years old, and I'm a pediatric occupational therapist in Flagstaff, Arizona. On a Tuesday in October, just past 4 in the afternoon, I sat in a small windowless office at the credit union on East Route 66, and a man named Brian slid a piece of paper across the desk toward me. The paper had my signature on it. The signature was almost mine. It had the loop on the L the way I do it, and the small flat tail on the Y, and it even had the middle initial of my maiden name, which is something I only ever write on official documents, and which no one outside my family would know to include. But the pressure was wrong. I have signed my name maybe 400,000 times in my life, on insurance forms and therapy charts and birthday cards to my husband, and I know what my own hand feels like. This signature had been drawn. Brian watched me look at it. He said very quietly, "Mrs. Gray, I need to call our compliance office. If you've ever sat in a chair and felt the floor tilt, if you've ever held a piece of paper that proved someone you loved had been lying to you for months, then stay with me. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It costs you nothing, and it helps stories like this one find the people who need them. And if you've ever been called confused by someone who needed you quiet, leave the word quiet in the comments. I want to know how many of us there are. To understand how I ended up in that office, you have to go back. Not all the way. Just to a Wednesday morning, 8 years ago, when a man named Carl from the IBW Local 1266 knocked on my front door at 6:40 in the morning, and I knew, the second I saw him through the glass, before he opened his mouth, that my husband was dead. Paul was an electrician. He had been a journeyman since he was 23. He worked the big jobs, the solar arrays out past Kingman, the substation rebuilds, the transmission line projects that took him out of town for weeks at a time. He was a careful man. He triple-checked his lockout tags. He inspected his own harness even when the safety supervisor said he didn't have to. He came home with his thermos washed and his boots tapped clean on the porch step, and he kissed me on the temple every single morning before he left at 4:30 a.m. 8 years ago, he was 46, working a solar farm build south of Yuma, and a scaffolding contractor had been falsifying weight load certifications for 9 months. The platform Paul was standing on gave way at 11 in the morning. He fell 42 feet. He did not survive the trip to the hospital. I want to tell you about Paul before I tell you about anything else, because if you don't understand who he was, none of the rest of this story will land the way it needs to. Paul was a tall, slow-talking man with red-brown hair that went gray at the temples in his 30s. He laughed in 3 stages, a quiet huff, then a real chuckle, then a wheeze if the joke really got him. He drank his coffee black. He read westerns. He could fix anything in the house except the dishwasher, which defeated him personally, and he held a grudge against that machine for 19 years. He laid the tile in our kitchen himself one summer, on his knees for 3 weekends, because he said no one would do it right, and he wanted to be the one who got it right for me. That tile is still on the floor. I stand on it every morning. I stood on it the night I heard the voice note, but I'll get to that. After Paul died, I did what widows do. I went to work. I drove our daughter Megan to her travel softball games. She was 20 at the time, finishing her sophomore year at ASU on a partial scholarship, civil engineering, and I refinanced the house twice to make sure she could finish her degree without crushing debt. I am a pediatric occupational therapist. I make a decent salary. It is not the kind of salary that pays for a private university and a roof and a car and grief counseling, but I made it work the way women like me make things work, by forgetting that I needed anything. The thing I stopped doing, after Paul died, was opening the mail. Not all of it. I opened the bills, I opened the cards, but the financial mail, the pension statements, the survivor benefit notices, the IBW correspondence about Paul's retirement annuity, the small, steady deposits the union had set up to honor his service. I let those pile up in a wicker basket on the kitchen counter and then moved to a drawer in the office. And then, eventually, when Megan was home one weekend in her mid-20s, I let her start handling them. She said it would be a kindness. She said, "Mom, I'm an engineer. I'm good with numbers. Let me take this off your plate." And I let her. Because she was 26 and she had a degree and a job offer in Scottsdale and a boyfriend named Derek who seemed nice enough. And because I was 48 years old and exhausted in a way that I had not yet learned was permanent. That was the unlocked door. That was the moment. 3 years before any of this happened, when I handed my own daughter the key to a house I no longer had the energy to defend. I want you to hear me say that, because I have spent a long time understanding it. I was not robbed in a single afternoon. I was robbed slowly, over years, in increments small enough that I did not feel them, by someone I had taught how to drive on a dirt road outside Williams when she was 15. Megan moved to Scottsdale at 26. She got the engineering job. She met Derek, who had been a line cook and was, by the time he and Megan moved in together, starting a food truck. His business plan was 3 pages, and most of those pages were photographs. Megan told me he was a visionary. I said, "That's nice, sweetheart." I drove down to Scottsdale every 6 weeks or so to take them out to dinner, and I paid every time, because that's what I had always done. Megan handled the paperwork. Megan filed my taxes. Megan, at some point in the spring of her 28th year, signed a change of address form that redirected my IBEW pension correspondence to a P.O. box in Tempe that she had rented under her own name. I did not know this. I would not know this for another 6 months. Here is what I noticed in late September, on a Saturday morning when I was reconciling my checkbook on the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. My credit union balance was lower than it should have been. Not catastrophically lower. Lower by a particular number, repeated over months, that I should have recognized, but didn't. I went to the credit union on Monday during my lunch break, and I sat across from a young woman with a name tag that said Ashley, and I asked her where the IBEW pension deposits had gone. Ashley typed. Ashley frowned. Ashley typed some more. Ashley said, "Ma'am, those deposits stopped 5 months ago." I said, "That's not possible." Ashley said, "The annuity was transferred. There's a notation here. Authorized by your daughter acting under power of attorney." I said, "I don't have a power of attorney." Ashley looked at me the way young people look at older women when they think they're about to have to be patient. She said, "Let me get my manager." The manager was a man named Brian. Brian was about 40, gentle-eyed, with a tie that was slightly too short for his torso. Brian printed out a document and slid it across the desk. The signature on the document was mine and was not mine. My middle initial, the maiden name middle initial that I never use except on legal documents, was right there. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. Brian said, "Mrs. Gray, I need to call our compliance office." That was when I realized I had been stolen from, not borrowed from, stolen from, by my daughter. I drove home in a state I cannot fully describe. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I drove home and I parked the car and I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes looking at the front door of the house Paul and I bought in 1999. The house where he laid the kitchen tile, the house where Megan had her first birthday party in a sundress and bare feet, and I tried to understand what it would mean to be a woman whose daughter had forged her name on a document and sold her husband's pension to a stranger for $23,000. That night I called Megan. I did not accuse her. I asked her, very calmly, if she knew anything about the pension transfer. She started crying within 10 seconds. She said, "Mom, I was going to tell you. I borrowed against it temporarily for Derek's business. The food truck has been a slower launch than we expected, and we just needed bridge capital, and I knew you wouldn't miss it, because you always say You don't need the money. Please don't involve lawyers. Please, Mom. I will pay every penny back. I just need a little time. I said, Megan, you forged my signature. She said, I signed for you. That's different. I had the POA. Uncle Ronnie co-signed. It's not forgery, Mom. It's authorization. I said, What POA, Megan? There was a pause. There was a pause long enough that I heard her swallow on the other end of the line. She said, I'll come up this weekend. Let me explain in person. I did not sleep that night. I lay in our bed. My bed now, I keep correcting myself even after 8 years. And I looked at the photograph of Paul on the dresser, the one from our anniversary trip to Sedona, and I asked him out loud, What do I do? He didn't answer. He never has. But sometimes, in the dark, I can still hear the wheeze of his 3-stage laugh, and that night I heard it, and it sounded like he was saying, Read your mail, Lore. Read your goddamn mail. The next morning, I opened every drawer in the office. I pulled out 2 years of unopened envelopes. I sat on the floor in my robe and I read everything. The IBEW notice of address change from April. The credit union notification of pension transfer authorization, signed by my daughter under a power of attorney I had never granted. The co-signer signature on the POA, Ronnie Gray, my younger brother, the man who taught Megan to ride a bike. I called Ronnie at 10 in the morning. He picked up on the second ring. I said, Ronnie, did you co-sign a power of attorney for Megan over my accounts? There was silence. Then he said, Lori? Oh my God. Lori, she told me you weren't doing well. She said you'd been forgetting things. She said your doctor was worried about early onset and that she just needed someone to help her manage your bills while you got evaluated. She said you didn't want to talk about it because you were embarrassed. Lori, oh my God. I read him the most recent neuropsych clearance from my employer, the one every clinician at our practice gets every 2 years as part of our credentialing. Clean. Excellent. Above average executive function for my age cohort. Ronnie started crying. Ronnie is 61 years old and a retired postal carrier, and I have not heard him cry since our father's funeral in 2003. He said, Lori, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I trusted her because she's your daughter. I trusted her because she said she was protecting you. I said, I know, Ronnie. I know. I want to say something here, because I think it matters. I was not angry at Ronnie. I have never been angry at Ronnie. He was lied to by someone who knew exactly which story would land, the story of a widowed older sister who couldn't quite keep up anymore, who needed her clever engineered daughter to handle the hard stuff. It is a story that the world is very ready to believe about women my age. That is part of what made it work. Megan didn't just exploit my trust. She exploited every assumption about a 54-year-old widow that this country has ever made. That night, the second night, I went looking through the office for anything else I might have missed. I found Megan's old iPad in a desk drawer, the one we'd bought her for high school, the one she'd left behind when she moved to Scottsdale and never asked for back. I plugged it in. It powered on. It was still synced to our family iCloud account, the one Paul had set up in 2014 and that I had never bothered to disentangle. There was a voice memo app on the home screen with 312 recordings. The most recent one was from August, 2 months earlier. I sat on the kitchen floor, barefoot on the tile Paul laid himself, and I tapped the play button. My hands were shaking before I pressed play. I want you to know that. My body knew before my brain did. Megan's voice came through the tinny speaker. She was laughing. She was talking to Derek. She said, Babe, relax. She'll never check. She doesn't even open the mail anymore. She just sits there looking at his photos. Mom is basically an ATM that cries. I just had to figure out the PIN. I stood on Paul's tile in my bare feet at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday in October, and I listened to my only child describe me as an ATM that cries. I listened to her laugh about it. I listened to Derek laugh too, in the background. A small chuckle, the kind of sound you make when someone says something clever that you also think is true. I did not cry. I want you to know that too. I think there is a kind of injury that goes past tears. I stood there for I don't know how long. The refrigerator hummed. The kitchen clock ticked. My feet got cold. At some point, I sat down on the floor with my back against the cabinet and I held the iPad in my lap, and I played the voice note again because I needed to be sure I had heard it correctly. I had. The next morning, I went to work. I treated a 4-year-old with sensory processing differences. I treated an 8-year-old with fine motor delays following a stroke. I ate half a turkey sandwich in my car at 1 p.m., and I did not cry. At 3 in the afternoon, I walked down the hall to the office of my colleague Janet, who is the clinic administrator and has been my friend for 15 years, and I closed the door and I said, "Janet, I need help, and I don't know how to ask for it." Janet is 62. She has been divorced twice. She does not get easily rattled. She said, "Sit down, what's happening?" I told her. All of it. The pension, the forged signature, the POA, Uncle Ronnie, the voice note. I played her the voice note because I needed her to hear it, and I needed someone other than me to have heard it, so that I would know I had not imagined it. Janet listened. Janet looked out the window for a long moment. Janet started to say, "Lori, I can't tell you what to do about your own daughter." Then she stopped. She took off her glasses. She set them on her desk. She looked at me and she said, "No, I'm going to say this differently. This isn't family trouble, Lori. This is fraud. And you are not confused." She picked up her phone. She said, "I'm driving you to my attorney's office tomorrow morning at 8. I'm picking you up. You're not doing this alone." That night, Megan called me. She wanted to know if I'd thought about what we discussed. I said I had not made any decisions yet. She said, "Mom, please don't do anything that we can't undo. I love you. I made a mistake. I'm going to fix it." I said, "I'll let you know." She said, "I love you, Mom." I said, "Good night, Megan." I did not say I love you back. It was the first time in 28 years. The next morning, Janet picked me up at 7:40. We drove to a strip mall on Milton Road and we sat across from an attorney named David Whitfield, who was maybe 45 and wore a wedding ring and listened to me for 45 minutes without interrupting. At the end, he said, "Mrs. Gray, we need to file a fraud affidavit with the Yavapai County Sheriff today. We need to revoke that POA immediately. And we need to get the credit union to open a formal investigation within the 90-day window from discovery, or you lose your strongest restitution path." I said, "Okay." He said, "I have to ask, do you want to press criminal charges against your daughter?" I said, "I don't know yet." He said, "That's a reasonable answer. We can preserve the option without committing to it today." We filed everything: the affidavit, the revocation, the credit union notice. I signed papers for 2 hours. My hand was steady. I had stopped shaking sometime the day before, and I've not really shaken since. On the drive home, Janet didn't say much. She knew I didn't need filler. At one point, she said, "How are you?" I said, "I don't know yet." She nodded. She said, "That's okay too." 2 days later, I got a call from a man named Carl. Carl was Paul's old union rep from IBEW Local 1266. The same Carl who had stood on my porch 8 years earlier at 6:40 in the morning. He said, "Lori, this is going to sound strange. Paul left instructions with our office in 2016. He told us that if you ever called the union asking about the pension, not asking us to do anything, just asking, we were supposed to mail you a key. Your call to the credit union last week triggered our internal note. I'm putting the key in the mail today. It's for a safe deposit box at a Wells Fargo branch in Prescott. Paul paid 10 years of rental in advance. I don't know what's in the box. He didn't tell me. He just said you'd know what to do when you got there. I sat down. I sat down on Paul's tile, for the second time in a week, with my back against the cabinet, and I held the phone and I said, "Carl, he did what?" Carl said, "He set this up in 2016, about a year before he died. He said he wanted a safety net for you. He said, 'Carl, you don't know my wife. She'll let someone help her who shouldn't. Just promise me you'll mail this if she ever asks.'" I promised him, Lori. I have been holding that envelope in my desk drawer for 8 years. I did not cry then either. I want to keep being honest with you. The tears came later. What I felt on the phone with Carl was not grief and not joy. It was a thing I had never felt before. It was the sensation of being seen by someone who was no longer alive. It was the sensation of my husband, 8 years dead, reaching forward through time and placing his hand on my shoulder and saying, "I knew, Lore. I knew." The key arrived on a Thursday. It came in a manila envelope with the IBEW return address. Inside was a small brass key with a tag that said, Prescott 4471. That was it. No letter from Carl. Just the key. Megan called me that same Thursday afternoon. She wanted to come up for the weekend. She said she'd been thinking and she wanted to have a real conversation, the way mature women do. She said she was bringing flowers. I said, "Megan, this isn't a good weekend." She said she was coming anyway. She said she missed me. She showed up on Saturday morning at 10. She had flowers, yellow roses, which I have never liked, but which she has always given me because she thinks I do. She had a framed photo of Paul, an old one from her high school graduation, that she had apparently had reprinted and matted. She came in, and she hugged me at the door, and that hug felt like an inventory. She was checking what was in the house. She was checking my face. She was checking the kitchen counter. She saw the Wells Fargo envelope in the trash, the empty one the key had come in, and she stopped mid-sentence and said, "Mom, what's that?" "Wells Fargo? We don't bank with them." I said, "Junk mail. Pre-approved credit card offer." I tossed it. She looked at me for half a second longer than was natural, and then she smiled and she said, "Oh, those are the worst, aren't they?" She sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours. She cried twice. She talked about Derek, about how stressed he was, about how the food truck just needed one more cash infusion. She talked about Paul. She talked about how she missed him every day, how she just wanted to make him proud with the business, how she knew she had made mistakes, but she was going to make it right. She did not once apologize for forging my signature. She did not once apologize for calling Uncle Ronnie. She did not once apologize for the voice note, which she did not know I had heard. I let her talk. I made her coffee. I watched her face. At some point, I realized I was watching her the way I watch my 4-year-old patients, clinically, with full attention, looking for the truth underneath the behavior. I realized I had been her mother for 28 years and a clinician for 26, and that for the first time in my life, I was treating her as a case rather than a child. It was the saddest moment of my life up to that point, and I include the morning Carl knocked on my door in that calculation. She left at 2 p.m. She hugged me again at the door. I hugged her back. I told her to drive safely. I waved from the porch. The next morning, I drove to Prescott. It is 90 minutes from Flagstaff, down the Verde Valley, through the curves at Jerome, and the climb up into the Pines. I had not driven that route in years. The Wells Fargo was on Gurley Street, a low stone building with a flagpole and a parking lot that smelled like Ponderosa. I walked in with the key in my pocket and my driver's license in my hand, and I said to the teller, "I need to access a safe deposit box, number 4471. It's been there since 2016. The teller, a woman about my age with reading glasses on a chain, looked it up. She said, "Mrs. Gray, yes, we have you on file as the authorized holder. Paul Gray set up the box and listed you as sole access. Right this way." She took me to a small room with a table and a chair, and she brought out a long metal box and set it on the table, and she said, "I'll give you privacy. Take as long as you need." She closed the door behind her. I sat down. I opened the box. Inside were two things: a sealed envelope, cream-colored, with my name written on the front in Paul's handwriting, and a thicker manila folder underneath it. I opened the envelope first. The letter was 3 pages, handwritten, in Paul's careful electrician's script. Small block letters, the kind he used on wiring diagrams. The first page said, "Lore, if you're reading this, something went wrong with the pension. I know you. You probably let someone help who shouldn't have. You always trust the people closest to you more than you trust yourself. And I have loved that about you for 26 years. And I have also worried about it for 26 years. I put the letter down. I had to. I put it down and I put my hands on the table and I breathed for a minute. Then I picked it up again. I'm writing this in 2016. We just had Megan home for spring break. I love that kid. You know I do. But I watched her this week, and I have to tell you something I never told you while you were sitting next to me on the couch, because I didn't want to put it on you. She is going to be okay in this world because she takes care of herself first. Always has. Since she was 4. You give and give and give to her, Lore. And she takes it. And she doesn't always notice what it cost you. That's not the worst thing in the world. A lot of kids are like that. But if I die before you, and I might, this work is what it is. I am scared of what she might do with you on her own. I am scared of what you might let her do because you love her and you don't know how to say no to her. I stopped reading. I put my head down on the table. I did not cry yet. I just breathed. I want to tell you something, Lore. I am sitting in the kitchen as I write this, and you are asleep upstairs. And the dishwasher is running and it is making that sound it always makes that I hate. I am writing this because I love you in a way that I am not always good at saying out loud. I love you because you laid down on the floor with our daughter when she had the flu at age 6, and you held her hair back while she threw up, and you sang to her for 4 hours straight. I love you because you drove 90 minutes each way to her tournaments, and you packed snacks for the other kids on the team because their parents didn't show up. I love you because you refinanced this house twice to put her through ASU, and you never once complained, not even to me. You are the most generous human being I have ever met, and the world is not always kind to people like you, and I am not always going to be here to stand between you and the world. I cried then. I cried with my head on the table in the Wells Fargo on Gurley Street in Prescott, and my shoulders shook, and I made a sound I have not made since the morning Carl came to my door at 6:40. The sound came out of a part of me I did not know was still there. I cried for maybe 12 minutes. The fluorescent tube above the table buzzed in a way that I noticed even through the crying. A small electrical hum that I think Paul would have heard the second he walked in and would have looked up at and clicked his tongue at and said something about ballast ware. I noticed the smell of the room. Old paper, dry vault air, a faint trace of the teller's lavender hand lotion still on the edge of the metal box where she had set it down. I noticed that the table was scratched in the upper right corner where someone before me had pressed too hard with a pen. I put my palm flat on that scratch. I held it there. Then I picked up the letter and I read the second page. So here's what I did. I bought a second life insurance policy in 2015. You don't know about it. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd say it was too expensive and we didn't need it. We did need it. It is for $310,000. It names you as sole beneficiary. The policy is in the manila folder underneath this letter. The contact info for the insurer is on the front page. The premiums are paid through 2030 on an auto draft from an account I opened in my name only with the Union Credit Union. Megan does not know about this policy. She does not know about this box. She does not know about this letter. Carl knows about the box because I needed someone to hold the key. Carl does not know what's in it. If something happened to the pension, this is your safety net. Use it. Don't save it. Don't be careful with it. You have been careful your whole life. Buy yourself that stupid yellow kayak you keep talking about. Take a trip somewhere you have never been. Get the kitchen redone. Yes, even the tile. I won't be offended. It's been 20 years and grout is grout. Buy yourself the life you didn't ask for because you were too busy giving it to other people. I put the letter down. I sat with my hands in my lap. The yellow kayak. I had mentioned the yellow kayak exactly twice in my entire marriage. Once at Lake Powell in 2008, when we rented one for an afternoon and I laughed for 3 hours straight because I was so bad at steering it. Once at a sporting goods store in Phoenix in 2014, where I had picked one up and put it down and said, "Wouldn't that be ridiculous?" Paul had been with me both times. Paul had remembered. He had been listening even when I thought I was talking to myself, and he had filed it away the way he filed away the location of every fuse box on every job he ever worked, and he had carried it with him for 2 years, and then 9 years more, all the way to a safe deposit box in Prescott that I would not open until he had been gone almost a decade. The third page was shorter. One more thing, Lore. If Megan is the one who hurt you, and I am writing this because I think it might be, I want you to know 2 things. First, it is not your fault. You raised her the best you could on a wage that was never enough, after I left you holding the whole thing alone, and you did it without bitterness. That she made the choices she made is on her, not you. Second, you do not have to forgive her for me. People say widows have to be soft. They have to keep the family together. You don't owe anyone that, Lore. You don't owe her access to you. You don't owe her your money or your house or your peace. You are not the family glue. You are a person. You are my person. And I want you to choose yourself for once. I want you to be a little selfish. I want you to live. I love you, Lore. I have loved you since the night we met at the lumberyard in 1991, and you spilled beer on my boot and apologized for 4 straight minutes. I will love you wherever I am. Buy the kayak. Paul, I sat in that room for a long time. I don't know how long. The teller knocked softly twice, maybe 40 minutes apart, and each time I called out that I was fine, and each time she went away. I read the letter twice more. The paper had a slight buckle along the bottom edge where Paul must have rested his thumb while he wrote. I could see the indent his pen had made through to the back of each page. He had pressed hard. He always pressed hard. He had ruined ballpoint pens his entire adult life. I opened the manila folder and I confirmed the policy was real. Northwestern Mutual, $310,000. Sole beneficiary Lorianne Gray. Premiums paid through 2030. There was a yellow sticky note on the inside cover in his block letters. Call them. They have been waiting. I closed the folder. I put the letter back in its envelope. I put both things in my purse. I put the brass key in the small zip pocket on the inside, where I keep my wedding ring on the days I don't wear it. I walked out to the lobby and I thanked the teller and she said, "You take care of yourself, Mrs. Gray." And I nodded because I did not trust my voice. I drove home. I cried on and off for the whole 90-minute drive. I cried through Jerome, past the old hotel and the switchbacks where the road folds back on itself like a piece of paper. I cried up the climb to Mingus Mountain with the pines getting taller and the air getting thinner. I cried past the cattle pasture outside Drake where a single black cow stood with its nose pressed to the wire as if it were waiting for me. I stopped at a gas station outside Ash Fork and I bought a coffee, and I cried in the parking lot for 10 more minutes with the cup going cold in my hand and a trucker 3 spots over politely pretending not to look. Then I drove the rest of the way home, and I sat on my back porch and I watched the sun go down over the San Francisco peaks. The light went orange, then pink, then the kind of deep red that only happens here in October. I sat there until the first stars came out. I did not turn on the porch light. I did not want to be visible. I wanted to be a woman in the dark on her own porch with her husband's letter in her lap. The next morning I called David Whitfield, my attorney. I told him about the policy. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Gray, this changes some things. Not the criminal piece, but it gives you options you didn't have a week ago. What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to send Megan a letter. One letter. Then I want to stop talking to her." He drafted it with me over the next 3 days. It was 1 page. It contained a photocopy of the forged transfer document with her POA co-signature, a transcript of the voice note from the iPad, and 1 sentence in my own handwriting at the bottom. The sentence was, "I am not confused. I never was." He sent it certified. She signed for it on a Thursday at 11:17 in the morning. I know the exact time because the tracking notification arrived on my phone while I was washing a plastic cup in the clinic break room. I dried my hands. I looked at the notification. I put the phone in my pocket. I went back to my 4-year-old patient and we worked on bilateral coordination with a set of pegboards, and she laughed when I made a silly face, and I made a silly face back. She called me 40 minutes later. I did not answer. She called 11 more times that day. I did not answer. She left voicemails. I did not listen to them. I gave them to David and he listened to them and he told me what they contained. Anger, then bargaining, then a long one in which she alternated between sobbing and accusing me of trying to destroy her life over a paperwork misunderstanding. And I said, "Delete them. Save the transcripts. I don't need to hear her voice." That weekend, I went to a sporting goods store in Flagstaff, and I bought a yellow kayak. It cost $640. The clerk was a kid of maybe 22, with a beard he had not quite grown into, and he asked if I wanted the entry-level model or the touring model, and I said, "The yellow one, whichever one comes in yellow." He laughed, and then he saw my face, and he stopped laughing, and he said, "Yes, ma'am." And he went to the back, and he brought it out on a cart. I paid in cash from an envelope I had drawn from the insurance disbursement. I put it in the back of my SUV. I drove home with the hatch half open and the kayak sticking out and bright as a school bus, and I felt ridiculous and I felt alive, and I cried a little on the way home and I laughed a little too. I put the kayak on a rack in the garage, on 2 padded arms Paul had installed in 2011 for a canoe we ended up selling. The kayak fit as if the rack had been waiting for it. I have not used it yet. I will, this spring. But I bought it. That was the thing Paul asked for. I bought it. In the 4 months after the certified letter, here is what happened to Megan. I did not engineer any of it. I did not have to. I stopped paying her car insurance, which I had been quietly carrying on my policy for 6 years because she kept forgetting to set up her own. The premium difference came back to me at $142 a month. I formally withdrew as the guarantor on her apartment lease, which she did not know I had been until her landlord told her in a phone call she described to Ronnie as humiliating. I stopped Venmoing her $200 on the 15th of every month for groceries, which I had been doing since she moved to Scottsdale because she said she was tight that month, every month, for 2 years. That came to $4,800 a year I had not been counting and had not missed because I had stopped looking. Derek's food truck folded in January. The LLC had been operating on the $23,000 from the pension transfer, and when that ran out, there was nothing else, because there had never been a real business plan, only photographs. The truck itself was repossessed from a parking lot in Tempe on a Tuesday morning. Derek moved out of the apartment in February. He left a note on the kitchen counter. Megan told Ronnie that was 4 sentences long and ended with the word sorry and did not include his forwarding address. Megan's landlord filed for eviction in early March because Megan could not cover the rent on her engineering salary alone, and the guarantor, me, was no longer on the paperwork. The credit union, separately, opened a formal fraud investigation into the pension transfer, and in late February they flagged Megan's file for potential criminal referral to the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. I did not push for charges. I did not block them either. David told me, "This is now between Megan and the state. You don't have to make this decision." I sat with that sentence for a long time. It was the first sentence anyone had spoken to me in months that did not require something of me. Uncle Ronnie called me in March. He said, "Lori, Megan called me last night. She wants me to co-sign on an apartment for her in Mesa." I said, "Ronnie, what did you tell her?" He said, "I told her no. I told her I love her, but I am never signing my name to anything for her again as long as I live. And I told her she owes you an apology that she is never going to make, and that she owes you money she is never going to pay back, and that she is going to have to live with both of those facts." I said, "Ronnie." He said, "Lori, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I believed her." I said, "I know. It's okay." He said, "It's not okay, but thank you for saying so, Chew." I could hear him swallow on the other end, the same swallow I had heard from Megan the night this all started. And I thought about how the men in my life had been telling me the truth in pauses for years, and I had not always been listening. Megan tried to come up to Flagstaff in early April. She drove up unannounced on a Saturday morning, and she knocked on my front door, and I opened it, and she was crying before she said anything. Her hair was unwashed. There was mascara dried under her left eye in a half moon. She was wearing the gray ASU hoodie I had bought her in 2018, and the cuffs were frayed in a way that made my throat close. She said, Mom, I have nowhere to go. Mom, I lost everything. Mom, please." I looked at her. I looked at my only child standing on my porch, the porch where Paul used to tap his boots clean. And I felt something that I want to describe to you precisely, because I think it matters. I did not feel hatred. I did not feel rage. I did not feel triumph. I felt the absence of the pull that I had felt my entire life when she needed something. The mother muscle that had always activated. The one that made me drive 90 minutes each way to softball games. The one that made me refinance the house. The one that made me Venmo $200 on the 15th of every month. That muscle was quiet. It had not died. It had simply stopped responding to her voice. I think Paul's letter had done that. I think reading the words, "You do not owe her access to you," had reorganized something in me at a cellular level. I let the silence sit between us for what must have been 20 seconds. A car passed on the street. A dog barked 2 yards over. The wind moved the wind chime Paul had hung from the porch eave in 2006, and it made the small, uneven sound it has always made. 3 notes, never in the same order. Megan opened her mouth and closed it. Her shoulders were shaking. I noticed, because I am a clinician and I notice these things, that she was not breathing into her diaphragm. She was breathing high in her chest, the way a person breathes when they are performing distress as much as feeling it. I am not saying she was not also feeling it. I am saying I could see both layers at once, and I could no longer unsee them. I said, "Megan, you cannot come in." She said, "Mom, please." I said, "I am not your bank. I am not your guarantor. I am not your safety net. I love you. I will always love you. But you have to build a life without my money in it, and you have to start today." She said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." I said, "I believe that you are sorry that this is hard. I do not believe you are sorry for what you did." She opened her mouth again. She said, "That's not fair." I said, "Megan, Duro?" She said, "Mom, that's not—" I said, "Megan." I heard the voice note. Her face did something I had never seen it do. It went blank for half a second, the way a screen goes blank when the power cuts. And then the crying came back. But it was a different crying. It was the crying of a person who has just understood that the person across from her knows the worst thing about her. She did not respond. She stood on the porch for another minute. She looked past me into the house, at the kitchen, at the tile. Then she turned around and she walked back to her car and she drove away. Her brake lights caught at the stop sign at the end of the block. They held for a long time before she turned. I closed the door. I sat down at the kitchen table on Paul's tile. I did not cry. I sat there for a long time. The clock above the stove ticked. The refrigerator hummed. The yellow roses she had brought in October were long gone from the counter, but I could still see the ring of dried water where the vase had stood. I got up, and I wiped it away with a damp cloth. Then I got up and I made myself a sandwich. Turkey, sharp cheddar, mustard on rye. And I ate it standing at the counter, and I went outside, and I sat on the back porch, and I watched a Stellar's jay land on the deck railing and look at me for a long moment before it flew away. Its blue was the exact blue of the sky behind it. I had never noticed that before. A week later, I got a card in the mail from one of Paul's old IBDW buddies, a man named Frank, who had worked with him for 15 years and who I had not heard from since the funeral. The card had a photograph of a sunset on the front and no other writing on the inside but his. It just said, "Lori, Carl told me what Paul did with the box. I am not surprised. Paul talked about you every single day on every single job site I ever worked with him. He used to say, 'My wife is the best person I know and the world doesn't always see it, so I see it twice as hard. I just wanted you to know that.'" Frank, I cried for an hour. I cried on the back porch with the card in my hand and the snow on the peaks still holding even into May. I cried because Paul had been seeing me twice as hard for 26 years, and I had not always known it, and because I would have to live the rest of my life without him seeing me at all, and because somehow, 8 years after he died, he had still managed to be the only person who saw me clearly when it mattered most. I put the card in the drawer of my nightstand next to the brass key and the envelope from Prescott. The drawer is full of small things now, a small museum of being seen. Now it is February of the following year, 16 months after the day I sat in Brian's office at the credit union. I am sitting on the back porch of my house in Flagstaff. The sun is going down. The snow on the San Francisco peaks is turning pink. I have Paul's letter in my lap. I have read it maybe 60 times. The paper is soft at the folds now. The envelope is in a drawer in my nightstand, next to a brass key that doesn't open anything anymore. The Wells Fargo box is closed. The policy has paid out. The money is in a trust David set up for me. But I keep the key because it is the thing my husband touched when he was planning to save me. I used some of the insurance money. I paid off the second refinance. I had the dishwasher replaced. Paul would have approved. The new one is quiet. I stand at the sink some nights, and I cannot tell if it is running unless I press my hand to the door. Paul would have hated that, in the best way. He would have said, "Well, that's just unnatural," and then he would have made his 3-stage laugh, the huff and the chuckle and the wheeze. I put the rest in a conservative annuity that pays me a small monthly amount, and I am still working at the clinic because I like my work. And because the 4-year-olds I see do not care that I am a 55-year-old woman whose daughter forged her name. They care that I have stickers in my pocket and that I sing the cleanup song with them. I have not heard from Megan in 7 months. The credit union investigation closed with a civil restitution order. She owes me $23,000 she will probably never pay. The criminal referral went forward. She pled to a Class 6 felony and got probation and community service. I did not attend the hearing. David sent me the paperwork in a manila envelope that looked, for one disorienting moment, like the one from Prescott. I read it once, and I filed it. Ronnie comes up every other Sunday for dinner. We are closer now than we have been since we were kids. He brings a casserole, usually the green bean one our mother used to make, and he has finally figured out how to do the fried onions on top without burning them. I make a salad. We talk about our parents, about Paul, about his garden, about the bird feeder he built last summer that the squirrels defeated within a week. We do not talk about Megan unless I bring her up, and I rarely do. I want to say something to you now, directly. If someone in your family calls you confused every time you ask a question, you are not the confused one. You are the one they need to keep quiet. Ask yourself tonight, who handles your mail, and why did you let them start? You don't have to answer me. Just answer yourself. That's all I'm asking. I used to think that love and trust were the same thing. I was wrong. Love is what I will always have for Megan. It is not something I can turn off, and I have stopped trying. But trust is something you earn and something you can lose, and a person can have all of my love and none of my access at the same time. That is what Paul's letter taught me, and that is what I want you to take from this story if you take anything at all. I also used to think that being a good widow meant holding the family together no matter what. I was wrong about that too. Being a good widow means being a good person, and sometimes being a good person means letting the family break in the place where it was already broken and refusing to be the glue that holds the lie in place. So this is the story. One safe deposit key in Prescott. One yellow kayak in my garage. One letter from a man who has been gone for 9 years and who saw me twice as hard the whole time. If any of this resonated with you, if you have ever been the family ATM, if you have ever been called confused by someone who needed you quiet, if you have ever found a piece of paper that proved someone you loved had been lying to you, please leave a comment and tell me. I read them. I do. Studies have suggested that financial exploitation of older adults costs Americans nearly $30 billion a year, and that close to 90% of that exploitation is committed by family members. I am one number in that count. You might be another. We are not alone, and we are not confused. Like this video if it spoke to you. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. And tell someone you love, before you go to bed tonight, that you see them. Twice as hard if you can. The world doesn't always. Someone has to. I miss you, you impossible man.